Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Baron of Dice, premium wargaming dice. Over 500 styles, over 4,000 customer reviews. Welcome to the best dice on the planet. The White Dwarf magazine has reached issue of 500. There's been many twists and turns over the years, and the history of White Dwarf magazine, from the absolutely fantastic eras to the maybe less so good weekly issues. But this is a whopping issue, and I don't buy it often, but it was a really nice one to have a flick through. And of course we have rules for the White Dwarf miniature. They tend to release these during big anniversaries, and we have a new plastic one, and that's what this video is about. Lots and lots of rules in the magazine for the White Dwarf, for all of their round-based fantasy games, Age of Sigmar, Underworld, Warcry, etc, even Cursed City. Sadly, nothing for Warhammer the Old World. I think that was a little missed opportunity there, and it's sad to see that the specialist games team weren't invited to, or I'm guessing they weren't invited to, provide a set of rules. But anyway, this is the White Dwarf miniature Grombrindal. It comes with a lovely scenic base which is round, but in this video I'm going to show how I build him with both options, so having on a square base for my Warhammer the Old World army, but also so I can clip him back into his scenic base, which will be for me, but maybe in the future I'll get him to use him in a round base game as well. So while clipping him off the sprue, it's time to clean up all the bits and start doing some dry fitting so I can work out how I'm going to go about this project. Welcome to Miniature Realms. My name is Stuart. In this video we're going to do the White Dwarf in two ways. The first thing I really wanted to do was make sure that I could fit the rock that's attached to his feet in between the scenic base that you get for Age of Sigmar, etc, and then also move it over onto a square base. I could trim him off at his feet, but I quite like the rock he's standing on, and in Warhammer the Old World that can be used as an oath stone, and I thought it'd be a neat way of doing it. So I trimmed off the little pegs at the bottom, and I started working out how it went together. It was quite easy in the end. I could glue most of the scenic base down, file away a little bit of the insides, and just leave 1/3 of it off so that I could clip it on the front afterwards. With the addition of a few magnets, that little front bit gets magnetised on, as does Grombrindal on his oath stone, and then I can remove him and stick him on a square base as well. As I so often do, I'm preparing my miniature with an underpainting method. So this start is a Zenithal, almost Zenithal highlight, using white through the airbrush over black, making sure it's mostly top down, but it's not a pure true Zenithal because there's not one single light source, which is what that means. So this is where it becomes more of an underpainting method. But overall I'm making sure that the light is more top down than it is from the sides, but I'm aiming to give myself a really nice pre-shaded grayscale miniature, of which will take fantastic glazed base layers. If we look at the miniature from underneath, you can see how dark it is under there, and it will mean when I paint the base layers on, I'll get a natural shadow built in already. And there are both pieces ready to go, including the scenic start of the base. And we move first on to the skin, and this is a well and tried recipe that I've been using a lot recently. So dwarf skin, deep purple and gloomy violet from the Vallejo Express colour range, which is like contrast, and then barbarian brawn, dwarven skin and elven skin from Duncan Rose's Two Thing Coats range. I've got all three of the express colours on my wet palette. I wouldn't normally use this skin from a wet palette here, but as I'm working on one single miniature, I thought I'd get them all out and I could use them as I go. So I'm starting with the dwarf skin, applying it to the very small amount of skin that is on this miniature. And this is a great paint. It runs into all the recesses, away from the flatter surfaces, giving you this natural kind of highlight effect that you get with contrast style paints. And then with the darker colours, I'll go in and add a bit more tone and variation. So the darker tone colour, the purpley colour, is perfect to go around all of the areas of the skin that reach the hairline or where it's going to be shadowed, and adds a really nice way of adding some depth. Then the reddish tone you can use to warm up the skin, focusing around the nose of the dwarf there, on the cheekbones, a little bit around the eyes as well. And you don't have to use those express colour paints, you just want to pick something that's a bluish purple and something that's more of a scarlet red. They work perfect with a skin coloured contrast style paint, so you need to be able to find those in the contrast range if you don't have the Vallejo Express colours. I'll be coming back to highlight the skin later on, so I like to do my eyes early, so any mistakes I make now I can touch up rather than doing it at the end. So now we move on to that highlighting stage, and I've got all three colours of that Two Thin Coats triad. Now I'm not really using the barbarian skin, the barbarian brawn, the darkest colour, but I like to have it on the palette there in case I need to darken back down with my colours. But I'm using the mid and high tones here, really just adding some very basic layer style highlights. Just focusing on the cheekbones, on the top of the nose, on the top of the forehead, making sure that I'm leaving some of the paint from before showing, making sure that I'm leaving all that darker dwarfen skin and expressed colour down in the recesses for those shades, including those later tones that I put in there, and really just using the base layer that was there, using those contrast style paints as a bit of an outline, as a bit of a guide for your later highlights. Keep your paints thin, a little bit less is more, and you'll get a really, really nice finish for very, very little work. Staying with Vallejo Express colour, we have Templar White and some medium. Just 50-50 mix here on my palette. I'm just painting it over on all of the white areas of the hair and beard. And obviously he's the White Dwarf. His white hair is very distinctive. I made sure with the underpainting method here there was a fairly heavy covering of the white paint, because these express colours or contrast style paints, the way they work for white is to shade really. So they'll go into all the recesses, giving it a slight greyish tone all over, but settling in those recesses for that deeper shadow, and then we'll come back afterwards and re-highlight the white. For the highlights I'm using model colour white grey, and then for the very, very top, bold titanium white from Pro Acryl. Now, this is one of the longest processes on the miniature. The white area probably covers a third of the miniature, and it's obviously his trademark part, so you want to take your time and work your way around, very much highlighting individual strands of hair most of the time. So you want to make sure that you don't allow the paint to run into those recesses and cover up those grey shadows. Some of the strands of hair are quite small, especially those on the plaited beard. So you really, really have to sort of take your time there and pick out the individual strands as best you could. You could absolutely dry brush this if you want to speed it up, but if you want it to be a little bit neater, this is definitely the way to go. The hair on the head is a little bit easier, the strands are a little bit bigger, and I've turned the miniature upside down in order to take the stroke and the brush towards the lighter end where it's going to be thickest. Now this is only a miniature for my army, not a display piece, so after about 20 minutes or so beavering away with the whites, I called it done, and while it's not perfect, I'm happy enough with it. Baron of Dice very kindly sponsor the show, which enables me to be able to afford to keep making these videos, and they have a fantastic range of dice for all different game systems, but also covering Warhammer the old world or fantasy style dice as well. And with dwarves being the subject of this video, I thought it'd be a great opportunity to show off these wonderful dwarf themed designs that they have on their website. Lots of different shapes and sizes, so you can get rounded corners or square, and their reviews are fantastic. A very, very trusted brand. And if you'd like to support the channel further, you can order through the link in the video description and use the code on the screen now, Miniature Realms, for 5% discount. Go and check them out. Baron of Dice, the best dice on the planet. So back to the painting, and we have contrast Wildwood and contrast Skeleton Horde, and the top of Grombrindal's cloak, he has a fur lining or a fur edge to the top, and I'm going to be using these paints in conjunction with each other, doing a bit of wet blending. So the Wildwood goes in the recesses and around the edges, and then I'll just blend a little bit of the Skeleton Horde on top as well, giving us a really nice two-tone effect. So now we have a Kellyan green contrast, and then Sentient Turquoise, Cursed Blue and Raygun Glow from the Two Thin Coats range as well. And those are actually the blues I'm using for my current dwarf army for Warhammer the Old World. The White Dwarf himself has a blue coat on all of the modern artwork at the moment, so felt it was close enough to look like the artwork for the White Dwarf, and I wanted to do something that's a fair approximation, but at a gaming standard, obviously nothing like the wonderful heavy metal paint job that Max has done, but I think this combination works nicely. So after starting with the contrast base layer, which again gives me that nice sort of multi-tone base layer that I can use as an outline to highlight on top afterwards, and then I work in with the 3 layers of 2 thin coats ranges paints, mostly again concentrating on the mid and higher tones. I've got that bottom colour in case I feel like I need to go a bit darker again, maybe I'll go a bit bright and want something to blend back down. Very much building up in traditional painting by layers here, with the lines getting thinner and thinner, keeping those bright areas towards the edges or towards the top where the light would catch. Staying with the Citadel contrast paint now, we have Garagak Sewer, one of my go-to browns for all things leather, and he has lovely leather gloves here. We'll use that as a base coat for that. But not only his gloves, I'm going to be using the Garagak Sewer for the turnbacks or the tops of his leather boots. Model colour Flat Earth and Tan Earth are really lovely highlight colours to work with Garagak Sewer. Together they form a really nice triad. The Flat Earth works very nicely on the highlighted areas as a first highlight, and if you paint that Garagak Sewer over a nice textured miniature, the raised areas match very well with that Flat Earth and just gives you to reinforce those highlights. And then the Tan Earth afterwards really adds that kind of top highlight and makes it pop. Just working my way around, making sure I'm picking up all of the highlighted areas. There's also a little satchel that's poking out of the edge of the cape at the back, which are also painted in the same combination. Contrast again, and it's Cygor brown this time, and this is a deeper, warmer reddish brown. I'm using this for the boots. He has black boots in the imagery, but I much prefer this colour and really enjoying painting with it at the moment. I'm also using it for the handle grip of the leather of his axe. And then we have Hull Red and German Camo Pale Brown, also from Model Colour, to complete this little triad. And again, regular viewers would have seen these combinations before. I'm just working up with the layers over the tops of the highlighted areas of the miniature. For the sides of the boots, I'm just picking out where the light would fix the most, almost adding a semicircle on both areas, so towards the heel and towards the side of the boot there, before coming in with that pale brown and adding some thinner edged highlights. They blend in really nicely together, so you can almost wet blend if the paint's a little bit wet here, which I'm doing, just a fine line, and it really highlights nicely. I think that's why I keep returning to these little colour combinations so often, because they work so well together and I find them very easy to do, having practiced them so many times. Now it's time for that lovely cloak and his nice red belt, and we have contrast Blood Angels Red, which is this beautiful vibrant paint. Goes on very easily, also very high in pigment, so covers very well. Just a nice thin layer, and on the cape here, because it's got larger flat areas, I'm trying to keep my brush going in one direction, making sure if there's any pooling, I'm spreading it out off in the flat areas but allowing it to pull in those recesses. Another 2 thin coats triad here with Berserker Red, Sanguine Scarlet and Demon Red, and I will use all 3 of these to highlight the cape, and it works very well in conjunction with that Blood Angels Red. Very much working from dark to light here, whereas some of the other triads I didn't really use the darker tone. For the red here I definitely will. So have all 3 paints on my wet palette here. I'm trying to keep the movement of the miniature, so I'm keeping my brush stroke going in the direction of the cloak, and I'm building up between all 3 layers, maybe returning and darkening something down or adding a little bit more of the top layer again, and just slowly building it up, letting them blend together a little bit, blending them on the miniature where I need to do. And if you are a newer painter and you don't do any sort of wet blending on the miniature, just doing faint lines and bringing them up layer by layer will work just as well. But have some fun playing around with triads of paints like this. It's a really good way of learning the controls, learning about thinning paints, and learning how you can use them in conjunction with each other. Once we get to the final edges of the miniature, you're very much just adding a neat line to along the bottom of the cloak and onto the highest points. And while there was only a little bit showing of the belt, I'm still doing the same method for highlighting here. No wet blending here, just building it up layer by layer. Model colour again with German Camo Medium Brown, Beige Brown and Tan Earth. All 3 of these on the wet palette again, a little bit of water. I'm just working on adding some highlights to that fur area on the back of the cape. We had a nice outline already by wet blending the two contrast styles together, but it wasn't neat enough and I definitely needed to add some of the highlights. So I'm just doing lots of thin lines here where the hair is, where the fur is, and just building it up layer by layer. It looks a little bit messy to start with, but I'm obviously going dark to light and adding more light here than darker colours. And once you've spent a bit of time just slowly doing these thin lines, a bit like with the hair on the dwarf's head, you get a really nice effect. And then a little bit of Iraqi sand also from model colour here. I felt that I needed a fourth even lighter highlight, and I didn't want to go to white. I wanted it to be different to his hair and really stand out. And the Iraqi sand, I've got some yellow sandish tones to it, so a little bit warmer. Just doing a few final highlights with this, and it really makes it pop. It's time to work on those metals, and first off we have a black metal from Scale Colour. We've got all of the scale armour. The armour runs up over his shoulders, it's hidden on his torso, so you don't have much to cover there. He's got some designs on his boots as well, so I'm giving him steel toe caps but also steel bottoms as well. He also has some designs on his knuckles, but of course the largest area is the axe head itself. For the base layer of the gold, we have Viking gold from the same Scale Colour range. We've got some large gold designs on the belt around the red, but then also this massive buckle, which is almost as big as a breastplate. And then a lot of the handle of the axe as well, including the designs around the edge of the steel area. And to keep his braids in check and his beards, he has these gold things. God knows what they're called. If anyone does know what these would be called, please let me know in the comments. Now for some Game Air Silver for the top highlight for all of the steel areas. I'm trying to make the axe stand out a little bit here. And while I'm not doing non-metallic metals, I want to give a little bit of that look. And I'm going to be using some contrast paints to kind of do a cheating method for that as well. But because of that, I'm spending a little bit more time highlighting the axe here, working along the top of it a little bit more and then blending out to the bottom, but not all the way to the bottom of the axe head. And then in the center of the axe, I've added a little bit of highlight in the top corners and blended them out, and then just a little bit towards the other side, taking my time building it up with that top area and then adding a little bit of water and slowly feathering it out. I'm adding a few little directional marks on the lower part to show where the light would catch, but not a thick solid area. We'll come back to that blade a little bit later on, but I'm also highlighting each of the individual scales of the armour with the same Game Air Silver. Again, the Game Air Silver is needed on the shoulder armour here, just picking out the higher areas. You get a nice natural shadow where the recesses are. And of course the same again with that little bit of armour on the leather glove is across the knuckles. The boots require a little bit of highlighting too, so I've focused along the bottom edge and then on the very top of the steel toe cap, leaving some of the darker shadow where they meet, and a couple of little patches along the edge as well. So we have Dwarven Gold and Elven Gold from the same Scale Colour range, and those are going to be for the highlights of the gold areas, funnily enough. So we're starting on one side of the axe, the side that's leaning slightly more towards the light, and just building it up slowly, keeping the darker Viking Gold in the recesses still. These golds are fairly close in colour when you use them as a triad, so they're quite a subtle highlight or variation between the dark and the light. Now we will reinforce that with some oil washes later on, but I quite like the effect that it gives. Now using that Elven Gold to really pick out those highlights. I think it really starts to pop here and looks very shiny. Now we're going back to that axe I talked about, and this is Contrast Pterodon Turquoise, and I've got this on the wet palette and I've thinned it almost 50-50 with water. The shaded areas of the axe that are left in that sort of darker black metal, I'm just here adding it in there and glazing it over, so I'm blending across both light to dark, and it just adds a nice bluish green hint to it, the kind of thing you see in non-metallic painting, and I think it just gives a really nice effect, something quite striking, a little bit higher than just standard kind of tabletop dry brushing silver, but definitely nowhere near as time consuming as full non-metallic metal. Focusing on the bottom half of it here, so by turning it round it's a little bit easier to add another layer. It's definitely less is more here, building up the layers as you go. Same on the back, but focusing towards the bottom of the axe there, where I did those little lines just to add a little bit of light. It really just builds that transition and that contrast between the darker parts of the metal and the top where the light is really reflecting off it. Now, while I had that paint on the wet palette, I added a little bit to the scales, but also a little bit to reinforce the shadow there on the steel toe caps. Now I'm going to show you my cheating way of doing gems as well, or semi-cheating way. So I'm covering them in black first, just to black them out. These are going to be black to red style gems rather than a green or something like that. You have gems on each of these beard ties as well. Of course, using the technical paint Spirit Stone from Citadel, which was designed for doing gemstones and that kind of thing, but also using Yellow Flame and Trooper White from Two Thin Coats. Now over that black, I'm painting a yellow half moon or semicircle towards the bottom of the gem. You can pick either side, depends where you want the light to go. This is the way I'm doing it here. Then after that, adding a little white dot to the top opposite corner. I'll now apply a relatively thick layer of Spirit Stone over the whole area. And because that's underpainted, you can still see them showing through, and the black tone there will give you that bit of a transition between the two. Now to start with, it hides the yellow a bit, so I clean my brush off quickly and go back with a clean brush and just follow the yellow line again. It just starts to expose it. You end up with this really nice effect that looks like a really smooth transition, which means you don't need to build up layer after layer. And then the final part is just to go in with a little dot of yellow. This is very much optional, and it really just makes it pop out even more. So we're pretty close to the end now, and we have Mantis Warriors green, contrast Minotaur and grey, and the Citadel contrast medium. Any medium will do, and it's a bit of a 50-50 mix on my wet palette. I'm just giving an overall glaze here of the Basilicanium grey. I wanted that white Zenithal pre-highlight, the underpaint to show through, and this gives a nice thin layer, just reinforcing some of those crevices and shadowed areas a little bit. Then coming back in with the Mantis green while it's still slightly wet with the Basilicanium grey, and just glazing in areas and patching just to give the stone a multi-toned look. This is a ready mixed oil wash grease from Soilworks, which is by Scale Colour or Scale 75. I'm just using this in lieu of any Citadel style washes. Again, this stuff is fantastic and easy to use. If you've watched my tutorials, I bang on about it all the time at the moment. It's because I think it's fantastic. Over the metallic paints here, using it very sparely. I didn't need any gloss varnish or anything to protect beforehand. You just want an old brush, and just allowing this to go into the recesses a little bit, mostly focusing over the gold because I think that's what needs the most of the shadow. I think we've done enough work already with the contrast style effect on the steel areas, but what it will do is it will run into the recesses, unlike a wash does, which tends to pull on the top, and when it dries, it will dry darker in the recesses, giving you that bit of shadow, but it'll also just age it all, bring it together, do some of the good stuff that washes do, but less of the bad stuff. I'm also using it on the rock and the base as well, along with dark mud from the same range, which I didn't video me opening the pot, so you can't see a picture of that one. But again, just adding it into the recesses where I want the shadow to be. I can tidy this all up in a moment. And then cracking out the artist's white spirit, and this is the joy of the oil paints, is that you can tidy them up afterwards. This isn't anywhere near as strong as DIY white spirit. You can also pick up something called Sansador in art shops, which is a very similar thing. Very sparingly, just cleaning off the oil wash from any areas that I think it's dried too dark or pulled at all. And this is the beauty of the oil washes. You can just tidy them up like this, whereas once a standard wash is dried, that's it, it's there. Can also tidy up the flat areas of the base as well, leaving that oil wash in all those recesses, and because it dries very matte and a dusty look, and you'll know that a lot of military modelers use oil paints because it gives a really nice weathering effect. That effect will be present on this rock. Now just brushing in a little bit of dry pigment all over the stone. I'll blow the excess off afterwards. Again, it dries it, mats it down, it sticks in all those recesses. That's all I'm really doing with it. I'm not going to fix it or seal it because it's going to be plenty enough of it staining what I want it to do. I know a lot of people ask the questions, well, you haven't fixed it, will it just come off? If you really rub it hard, it will do, but if you're like me and you like to handle your miniatures around the base, I do this with nearly all my miniatures and I don't have any issues with it at all. A few little tufts here on the base, and I'm using this here to block any of the gaps from the stone. There's a slight gap because of the shape of it. I wanted it to be removable and to stick in the other place, so this will just fill those gaps perfectly. A little bit of mud effect there on the base and on the stone as well, just to tie them together and give it another dimension. And then finishing off with a black rim on the square base. And there he is in all his glory on that square base, which is where he'll stay most of the time for me. He's going to be a stand-in general until the new king on shield bearers arrives for Warhammer the Old World. Hopefully not too much longer now. But as you can see, I've already painted up the AOS base and he's fully magnetizable. And if he goes in the cabinet, I may well keep him in this one as well. So we just clip him in, clip the front back on, and away you go. And there he is on that base as well. And I did enjoy painting that base. I didn't think I needed to cover it in the tutorial. All of the techniques I've used are colours that are elsewhere on the miniature, so you get the idea. Now, I had a blast doing this. My first ever White Dwarf miniature, which I sadly don't have anymore, was when I was in my early teens, and it was one of the originals. I can't remember which one it was, maybe the second or third version that they did, but I don't think I ever painted him, or I can't remember painting him. And I haven't owned any of the other commemorative miniatures at all. I just don't get around to buying them for some reason, but I saw this sculpt and it's absolutely fantastic, and I knew they would fit so well into the old world. I wanted to just paint it anyway, and I thought it'd make it a nice fun video at the same time. So let me know what you think. Have you picked up this miniature yourself? Have you picked him up for Age of Sigmar? Have you picked him up for any of the other games? Have you picked him up for Warhammer the Old World? I know I've seen a lot of them in the Warhammer the Old World dwarf groups. Lots of people are converting him or using him like I have on a square base. Many different flavours are used. It's such a good miniature. I think it's really attracted a lot of people. I wanted to keep it at a sensible level of paint job for a wargaming army with techniques that intermediate painters can follow and make use of. I know the higher end painters won't be watching this channel for tips and things anyway, but I'm pretty happy with the way he came out. Thank you very much for watching. If you would like to support the channel, please do give the video a like, subscribe. All of those things really do genuinely help. If you're new to the channel, there's loads and loads of different painting tutorials for all different games, but lots of Warhammer related stuff. And if you'd like to support the channel further, I have a Discord which is free to join, for a lovely place to go and chat all games and all things painting or anything wargaming related. I also have a Patreon as well, and that has a number of different tiers for those of you who'd like to just support, starting at £1 a month, and there are some higher tiers as well where there's some one-on-one painting tuition, so have a little look at those if you might be of interest to you. Thank you very much for watching, take care, and I'll catch you soon.